right, we're live. There is going to be a delay. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back. We're here for a global. Actually, no, this is a Rancher Masterclass today. Yeah, I don't even know where I'm at. I just got back from OpenSUSECon, so I'm a little behind. So I am joined by Cody. Cody here is going to walk us through Rancher Extensions already extended. This is our second part of a two-part series. You did the last one a couple weeks back, and this one here will be live for it. So without further ado, let's introduce Cody. Cody, give us a little bit about you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I've been at Rancher now for about 3 years. I work on the UI team for the Rancher product. I've recently joined the extension side of things, and yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. So you're going to talk us through a second part of a two-part series. So we're going to take a little deeper dive. So a little less slides, a little more technical for those who haven't seen it. It real quick, if someone wants to, kind of, I hate to say it, but they're going to do it. Multitask. Where can I learn more about Rancher extensions?
Um, there's actually multiple places you can learn more. I'll actually have some links in the slides that I can share as we go along. But mainly there's going to be docs and example repository that we'll have linked.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, let's get started.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll start. Hello, everyone. This is our presentation, Rancher Extensions Already Extended. In this one, we're going to demo some of the existing extensions that we already have, some of the features that those extensions have used, and show you some examples of how to use those features so that you can have them in your own extensions. For this agenda, we're going to go over some quick introductions, brief demos of the features and the extensions. Then we're going to talk about the global applications, configuring cluster resources, node drivers, and then we're going to finish off with Q&A. For introductions, we have the three Alex, Jordan, Neil. They were the primary contributors to extensions. And recently myself, I just joined for the extension work. And hopefully I'll contribute as much as them. But for now, they deserve most of the credit. As already mentioned, but I'll bring it up again. This presentation picks up where the Zero to Hero presentation left off. If you haven't seen that presentation yet, it would probably be helpful to watch it. It was recorded over on YouTube, and here's the link to it. And that's what you're looking for if you want to take a look. All right, so let's get started with demoing the extensions and some of the features we're going to go over. We start here. What you'll see is we have a Rancher instance, and this instance already has several extensions installed. Notably, I'm going to go over the Elemental extension, and let me close Teams real quick. I'm going to go over the Elemental extension and the Kubeboarding extension. Elemental, it is basically an OS management system for Kubernetes that affects everything across your Rancher instance. It's not specific to a single cluster. It can deploy or manage your operating systems across all of your clusters all at once. So that's why we would consider it a global application. Kubewarden, on the other hand, is a policy management piece of software. What that effectively means is it allows you to define policies that you want your clusters to adhere to. It is specific to single clusters. So if you have it installed and you make modifications to the configuration, it's going to be on a per cluster basis. It's not going to be a global Rancher-wide change. So what does that mean in practice? What that means in practice for, say, Elemental, it being a global app, is that it will show up here underneath our main menu, underneath the global apps section. If we go to it, you will see that it doesn't have the context of a cluster. There is no namespace filter up here on the top. There aren't any cluster actions that you can use, but it should still be familiar. It is still managing Kubernetes resources like more or less everything else in Rancher. If we take a look at, say, registration endpoints, this should look familiar. We do have the list view for resources. We do have this edit/create view, again, for the resources. And as I've already used the navigation or this resource navigation, which you do end up seeing and you should already be familiar with if you're familiar with Rancher. On the other hand, KubeWarden, as I mentioned, it's specific to a cluster. We don't have it underneath our global apps. Instead, we have it within our cluster itself, our cluster explorer. If you take a look down here toward the bottom, you have KubeWarden as one of the groups inside of your Rancher or your cluster. Underneath it, again, you have resources, very, very similar. But this is, of course, within the context of a single cluster. You have the list view. You can create, and of course, you have the detail views. And as I mentioned, in contrast to Elemental, you do have your namespace filter up at the top, and you do have your actions. And really just foreshadowing for later so you're familiar, but this is more or less what you're looking at for those two extensions. I also wanted to demo the node drivers, but unfortunately it's not something I'm going to be able to demo, but I do want to make you familiar with it because I will talk about it a little bit more later. We do have an existing OpenShift node driver extension. Unfortunately, I do not have access to OpenShift, so it's not something I'm going to be able to demonstrate here. But if you don't know what node drivers are effectively what allows us to provision clusters on different cloud providers. If we had the OpenShift extension installed here, you would see another tile, kind of like DigitalOcean, that sort of thing, right here. And what the node driver extension allows you to do is it allows you to modify or it allows you to change what gets shown, say, underneath like the machine pools. So you can show different regions, images, whatever is specific to that cloud provider. Beyond that, if you have a different way to create credentials or something like that, it will let you modify this screen and store different data that you need in order to get access to the provider. But with that said, again, this is just what you could modify. I can't demonstrate OpenShift here today, but do know that you can do it. I will talk about it a little bit more later. Whoops. So helpful concepts. I think it's helpful for you to understand a couple things before we dig a little bit deeper into Rancher. Specifically, I think it's important to know that there's a large emphasis on resources and types. The Rancher UI is resource-centric instead of page-centric. Most resources have a one-to-one relationship with a Kubernetes resource. And Rancher creates default views, tables, and models for these resources. As a developer, you will typically define configurations or overrides for these defaults rather than creating them from scratch. The other concept I think we should talk about, even though it was introduced in the last presentation, is products. Products are largely just a way for you to group together resources, configurations, overrides, and stores. A single extension can actually have multiple products. Rancher itself has multiple products, one of those being the Cluster Explorer. which we had already gone over when we were looking at the CubeWarden. This is the Cluster Explorer product. But yeah, I think those two concepts are good to emphasize and understand because it's a little different than doing normal, I would say, front-end development. So from there, let's talk a little bit more about the global application. Where we left off before was here. We defined a product. It was in the store, gave it away, and we gave it the my product name. What that yielded was this, which was the global app, my product name. And if you clicked on it, it would take you over to this page, which was the default view for this global app that you had just created. Now, what might be more useful is for us to instead change what this default page is, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that. And to do that, we're going to start by linking to a different page instead of the default page. And let's go ahead and let's start with the code. I'll just go ahead, I'll put in the code and then we'll discuss it a section at a time. We have to create the new page, main.view. This will be a very, very simple template, hello world. And then we have to define the routes. While this reloads, I will go ahead and I'll discuss the code of each of these. So the first part, what we did is we made it so that our product could link to a new page. Specifically, we're adding this new section, this to section. And up here in the top section, this should be familiar if you're familiar with the view router. We're giving it a name, we're giving it params. However, we are also giving it this metadata down below, which is, as you can see, very similar to the params data. This meta object is necessary, but it isn't something this is something that's specific to Rancher itself. This isn't something that's a part of view router. The reason that we have to have this section is it's a workaround for loading routes in our dynamically loaded extensions. It's an unfortunate byproduct, but it's just something that you need to know and be aware of because it is required. But effectively, what this does is it changes the link that the global app button in the menu will link to. Then what we ended up doing is we created a new main page. It's just a hello world. If you're familiar with Vue components, you should recognize this. There is no script or anything like that attached to this as of right now. And then we ended up defining a new route. Again, this is very much, or this should very much be familiar if you're familiar with Vue routes. This is just the top section is just how you would define a route in Vue. But again, you'll see the familiar meta section, and it is required. It's just something that we have to have within Rancher. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at what that yields. You'll see this is where our product ended up linking to previously. If we now go to the my product name, you'll see that it's now linking to a new page, and I'll click on it, and it takes us to that new page with the Hello World template. So now really what you can do from here is endless. You want to have like Vue components, and anything that you want to do with Vue components, you can now do. But what we do see is we have this section here for navigation, and we have this hello world. So what would you have to do if you wanted to say add some new navigation to this? That's actually fairly simple. If we take a look at the product page, let me go ahead and update that. and I'll discuss it while it reloads. There are two lines that we changed, specifically this line and this line. We're getting access to the basic type method. The basic type method is then registering a new resource or type with our product. This is an existing resource within our or within Rancher. You can also create custom resources and add them here, but just demonstrating a very, very simple one. And if we go and we take a look back at our page, we now have navigation for our product, and we are linking to that resource. As you can see, this is the resource that we added, and it kind of just works for you. Now, let's just say that you didn't actually want to have that navigation at all. Maybe you didn't want to manage resources in your global app. A way that you can get rid of this and just do a fully custom global application and not rely on our resource-centric view is one quick change to the main. What you end up using is this layout. We now have a script. We are now adding the layout to the component. This layout plane is one that we've already defined within Rancher itself. Let me go ahead and save that, and we can reload the page. And you can see we no longer have navigation. We now have a blank page. It does have default padding. You can override it through CSS if that's what you want to do. We will probably make an update to the plain layout so that there's absolutely nothing including padding. But as you can see, you now have a blank slate, more or less, and you can do whatever you want. You don't have to have the resource-centric view that Rancher has. But yeah, from this point, really, as long as you know how to use Vue and Vue components, you can make anything you want within the Rancher app as a global app. So let's go ahead and let's continue. Oh, I guess for a further example, even though what I'm showing you is still, I'd say it's still fairly basic, we do have an existing, or we have an existing example in our docs. This will go over kind of what I have already shown you. It will go into a little bit more depth. You will see that we have things like add routes instead of just add route, which is a convenience method that lets you add more routes, more than one route at a time. You'll also see that we have multiple ways of configuring and defining new types. And you'll see the familiar, like say, basic type. But just leading you over to the docs, if you want to get basically if you want to use this as an example and try it out for yourself and go a little bit deeper.
So if you got a moment, I have a question coming in here.
Sure.
This is the question: how can we utilize node drivers to enable auto scaling of custom nodes where Rancher deployed as a Docker container versus nodes created by Terraform? Actually, I can answer that one. We don't recommend deploying Rancher as a Docker container. That's actually kind of I don't want to say the worst practice, but it's very, very, very close to that. So getting back to that question, if you do have further questions about that question about node drivers within a proper installation of Rancher, you can take it over to Rancher Slack. So that's slack.rancher.io. I will put it in the chat here, Vikash. And you can get a little deeper understanding of that. So sorry about that, Cody.
Yeah, no problem. Feel free to interrupt if there's any other questions that come on. All right, so now we're on to the next topic, and that's configuring cluster resources. And this is going to be more along the lines of what Kubeworden did rather than what Elemental did. So effectively what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to be able to add a group first. So let's go ahead and let's do that. We're going to add the group to the product. And I'll discuss it a little bit more in just a moment. So if we take a look here, there's really only two interesting things that we're adding. And that is we are now getting access to the map group and we are creating that group. The group name is something that code will reference, and the group label is what ends up getting displayed within the navigation itself. I mentioned that the code will reference the group name, and you see it immediately after in this basic type. Previously, what we ended up doing is we just used the basic type within the product itself in order to assign it on a, I guess, global level. Here, instead, what we're doing is we're saying we want a resource to be displayed underneath this new group within an existing product. So let's go ahead and see what that ended up doing. If we now go into the Explorer cluster for local, we will see a new group called group right underneath KubeWarden. And underneath group, we will have a basic type, and that basic type is custom resource definition. If we then click on custom resource definition, you will see that we already have default views defined. These are defined by Rancher. We didn't have to do anything for them, but they're also not super user-friendly. Typically, the defaults are used for resources that don't need much user input. In this example, if we take a look, we have the default list. It just gives you the Kubernetes state, the name, and what it was created, or when it was created. If we were to click on it, that would take us to the default detail view. And that is just a view of the YAML for this custom resource definition. If we wanted to edit it, it would then just take us to, again, the default, which is the YAML editor for the custom resource definition. But as we've already demonstrated, and as you already know, within Rancher, we normally try to allow you to we try to provide a better user experience for the most frequently used resources. And as you can see within KubeWarden, we've overridden the default view. We have more than just the state, or the state, the name, and the created at. Instead, we have the image, policies, and age. If you were to create it, of course, you have overridden the default create. And the same is true for the detail page. So we need to talk about how we would go about making those changes. And kind of just went over all of that. The first thing that we would need to, or the first thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about adding new table columns to the list view. And there's actually multiple ways that you can achieve that. Let me go ahead. Let me update the code. Product. Then I will discuss the changes. All right. All right, so what we have here is we have a way to define new headers. I think of headers as table columns. It's really just legacy. That's just what they were called from the beginning, but they are really a way to define table columns. You specify the resource that you would like to override the headers of, and then you specify what you want those headers to be. Here we have an example of using already existing table headers. There's actually a huge number of existing table headers within Rancher itself. Fortunately, they are not documented yet. It is on our list, to-do list, so we will be adding them. But know that they do exist, and if you do look at some of the other existing extensions, you will see some of the others that are getting used. With that said, we are also showing you two different ways that you can define your own table column. Here is one where you always have to give it a name. It needs to be a unique name. Then you're providing the label. That is going to be the column or the column header. That's just what gets displayed. And then for the first version, you are making a reference to field. So if the resource has the property field, it will reference that. In this second one, what we're doing is we're defining a get value, which is a lambda, and we are referencing the same field, and we're just concatenating it with a value 2 to create this field 2. The value.
So wait a minute. So if I may, the value in the first column is being referenced to that lambda where it says row.field. Is that correct?
They are making the reference to the same field.
Okay. There's a lot of fields in there. I was like, I got confused, going like, maybe I should like just ask.
Probably should have renamed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it'll be a little more clear when we go and take a look at the next example. But if it's not, we can take a step back and take a look again. But effectively, all I'm trying to demonstrate here is that you can reference a property on the existing resource, or you can define a new property by setting a get value lambda, and you can do it inline. If we take a look at what that code ended up doing, you'll now see that we have 2 new columns. One column is currently blank, and the reason it's blank is because field does not exist on a custom resource definition. However, field 2, which is also referencing that non-existent field, is concatenating it with the value 2, which is why you end up seeing undefined 2. Obviously, this isn't ideal. We want to see actual values for each one of these, and I'm going to show you how we can do that. And the way that we do that is we create a model. I'll explain what a model is a little bit better here in a moment. New file. Okay. So a model is something that is Rancher specific. Conceptually, you can look at it as a way for you to add, say, new fields, new getters, new setters to a Kubernetes resource that otherwise wouldn't exist. Sometimes it's useful to be able to concatenate fields together. Sometimes it's useful to derive one field from another. And this just lets you define new properties, new getters, new setters on a model specific to a resource.
So real quick, Cody, you gave that thing a crazy name. Does that have anything to do with how extensions work? I mean, it looks like API extensions.k8.s. Like, why is it so long convoluted? Is there a binding that goes back?
Yes, that's a good question. I guess there's 2 things to note. One is that this crazy name has a one-to-one relationship with a Kubernetes resource. This is the name of the custom resource definition resource or type. If we go and we take a look at our URL for that custom resource or for that type, you'll see that this is the actual Kubernetes type. It's referenced in the URL. It's referenced everywhere. The reason that's significant is that Rancher will automatically go into the models and look for the type and then bind that to the type. You don't specify this anywhere. This is something that is done automatically for you by Rancher, but you do need to make sure that the type or the name in the model matches the type exactly. So getting back to the example that we just did, I just created this model. We now have this getter. That getter creates this new field. And within, or because that now exists, if we go back to our list, you'll now see that both of our columns are now completely filled. All we did in that model, whoops. All we did in this model is we're grabbing the first section of the name and we're returning that. That's really all that we're doing. So as you can see, as we go down through each one of these rows, in field, we're just referencing add-ons. Admission policies, alert managers. In field 2, as we had defined it in product, what we're doing is we're taking the field that we defined and we're concatenating it with 2. That's all we're doing. But as you can see, we were able to automatically load all of this up just by taking a look at, or just by defining a new model that has a new property or a new getter named field. Should have named it something that wasn't field so it wasn't as confusing, but hopefully that clears it up a little bit better. All right. So now we are on to the detail view override. As I had mentioned before, if we go to the detail view, by default, all it shows is the YAML for this custom resource definition. So it would be really nice if we could define completely new pages, give completely different user experience, and display different data. We're going to take a simple example, but I think it works and it illustrates the power of being able to override the default detail view. So similar to the model, again, we're going to have this crazy name, and that crazy name is just the type itself within Kubernetes. And let's go ahead and create that. And similarly, it has to go underneath the detail directory, just like the models had to go underneath the models directory. So let's go ahead, add that definition. And while that reloads, let's talk about this a little bit more. Down at the bottom, the template isn't very interesting. We're referencing an already existing name, and we're referencing the field or the property field that we just created. That's what we're going to display on the page. What you do need to know is that when you create a new view, whether it's a detail or an edit view or something like that, you will need to create this prop. And this prop is the value prop. Rancher, when it loads the detail view, will pass a value to this prop, so you know which which instance is currently being worked on. If you didn't have this value, you wouldn't know what the current instance is. This is more or less how Rancher passes that information to you. I think we have to refresh this one. Okay. So as you can see, we now have a totally new detail or a custom detail view instead of just YAML. And similar to what we had talked about before with the global application, the possibilities are now more or less endless. You can load up your own view components. So anything you can do within view components, you can now do within this detail view. If you want, you can override the list view. You can override the edit view. I think there's another, I'm just like forgetting. But what that means is, at least for the list view, we do have some resources which completely override what you see in the list view. Not thinking of one off the top of my head, but you can override this and have a completely different view if that's what you wanted. So, okay, header button. Let's talk about the, up until this point, effectively I've shown you ways where you can more or less create new views, new global apps, new groups, but everything is new. It might be nice to show you ways to modify the existing Rancher UI. And we do have hooks to allow you to do exactly that. As I had mentioned in the beginning, we have these cluster actions up here, up in the top right. These are actually just actions. They're not specific to clusters. I guess, again, just a little foreshadowing. But let's show you how you can add a new action to here. So let's start here. We will add it to the index. And then I will talk about what this change actually is. Okay, so here what we do, or what we're doing, is we're adding a new action. Whoops. We're first specifying where we want this action to be added. We want it to be in the header. We're then filtering it so that it's only shown when the Explorer product is active, so the Cluster Explorer. And then we're giving it information that we need in order, or we're giving it information to define the button, tooltip, the icon, and what should happen if it is invoked. And you'll see that we now have this new button appear as one of the actions. If we click on it, you will see that it will log the message that we want it to be logged along with the arguments. So as I kind of already mentioned, it is currently restricted to just the Cluster Explorer. If we went to, say, our global app, it's no longer present. So what should you do if you want it to already be, or if you want it to be present? You should just come back here and remove this filter. If you remove this filter, it will be present everywhere, including within the Cluster Explorer. So once this refreshes, you'll now see it's back. If you click on it, you'll still see the same action. There it is. And if we go back to the cluster itself, you'll still see that it's present in the cluster. But yeah, that's a way for you to add new actions. If you would like to explore all the other hooks that we do have the documentation which shows you all those existing hooks. In actions, we do have other actions, namely within tables. So you can then add actions to the tables themselves. We do have cards specifically for the cluster dashboard. We have, say, panels in multiple locations. But really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to direct your attention to the documentation. It does have existing hooks. For each one of the hooks, we have screenshots which exemplify exactly where you're going to be able to modify things. And under each one, we do have an example snippet of code which shows you how to use the hook to achieve what you see in the screenshot. So if you would like to modify existing Rancher, this is a way for you to do it, and it's a way for you to take a look and see what does exist right now. We will be adding more hooks, but this is what we currently have. Okay, no drivers. Do you have a...
No, go. Carry.
Okay. So for no drivers, already mentioned, I do not have access to OpenShift. I cannot demo this. I just can't demo it. The reason that I'm including this is we've had questions several times already about no drivers. There seems to be interest in having no driver extensions. And I just want you to know that it is possible to make no driver extensions. We have already made one for OpenShift. It does work. And we have made documentation on how to create a custom no driver. It's actually pretty extensive. It kind of tells you a step-by-step. It tells you what parts you can modify, gives you the screenshots to give you more context. But if you went through it, It's pretty good, solid documentation for how to create a node driver. And we've also released that code as an example over here in the UI plugin examples. Underneath package, if you went to node driver, you can see our OpenShift node driver that we have already implemented and you can use as your own example. It does work. We have seen it, but again, I just can't demo it. Don't have access to OpenShift. But if your primary interest is in creating a node driver, know that this example exists and there is documentation for how you can do it for yourself. And with that, we can leave it for Q&A.
Well, I've been asking questions as we go along here and just some really positive feedback. So we'll give it a moment, see if anyone has some Q&A. I don't have any. I think some of mine were as we were going along, and people out there, it's like, Rob's paying attention. Yeah, I had some questions about what were you doing? How was that bound together? So a lot of that makes sense. I posted a link of the documentation in the chat so people can do that. Also, a link to the Slack channel where you can join Slack. You can go in there and just ask your questions around extensions. I think it's #extensions. So if you're into Slack, go make sure you try to go to the right Slack channel. If you ask us a question over there in the KubeBorden channel, they would probably just shrug their shoulders. But it was a great presentation, Cody. I do appreciate this. I learned a lot. I wish I had some time to actually write some extensions. What is in the future for extensions coming up here? You guys touched on node drivers a little bit. Is there anything else that you guys are looking to bring to this new exciting platform that we have here?
There are more. There is more. I'd say one of the more recent ones that actually is being spurred by some community feedback is around persistence. We don't have a solution to it yet, but we do want to make sure that we can provide persistence for these extensions. The example or the example question that brought this up was somebody had an extension that they needed to be able to configure on their initial install, but that configuration should persist from that point forward. Our initial reaction was to say, go ahead and create your own config map and put it in there because the UI is able to create its own config map. But we have some concerns about how that will be affected by RBAC. So we're going to discuss it a little bit further before we have an official answer, but we are looking into, say, persistence. Okay. Another thing that we are looking at is, as of right now, the Rancher UI, the components tend to be really tightly coupled. There's been some effort to extract more of those to make them more reusable so that you can more easily use them in your extensions. And we're going to continue doing that so that you can use more and more of the already existing components. I would say those are two of the big ones that we're currently looking at. But we have 3 people that are all working on it. So there's going to be plenty more that's coming up.
Awesome. Well, we do not have any more questions. And with that, I think we can wrap it up. Cody, thank you very much. We do appreciate you coming on the show, walking us through all of this. This is very exciting. If you have any more questions on that, again, you can join the Slack channel at slack.io/extensions. Post your questions there. In the chat, I linked to the documentation for the Rancher extension, so feel free to go explore there. There's a lot. This is almost like you can write your own extensions just by following the examples that you have. It's almost one for one. That's what I have to give it up for the extension team and the docs team for putting that together and making this very easy for developers or engineers, for that matter, be able to just go in there and write their own extension. So, Cody, thank you very much. Everybody else, hold on here. Hold on. We have a question. Can we get it in real quick, Cody?
Yeah, no problem.
Alex is asking, what about installing extensions on an air-gapped system? Ooh.
So that is actually being worked on. There are some workarounds to allow you to do that right now.
Mm.
But Jordan, he actually has a PR that's in draft to allow a sleeker, easier experience, so that you can do exactly that. It should be coming pretty shortly. But if you need it, say now, there is a workaround. I don't know if it's documented. If you asked in the Slack channel, we can definitely point you in the right direction.
Yep. There you go. If you guys, a lot of your questions can be answered in that Slack channel. Again, slack.rancher.io #extensions. Make sure you go there. But I would probably wait for the official PR so you're not doing some workaround twice. Like I always hate doing that. But I think that's all of our questions. Cody, thank you again. We will see you guys in the community.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.